for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to use as much time as I may consume. I rise tonight to talk about something that happened on January the 20th. On January the 20th, the President of the United States took the oath of office at this Capitol, and then shortly thereafter, he signed several executive orders. One executive order was Executive Order 14151. That executive order ended all DEI programs. The argument that DEI initiatives constitute reverse discrimination fundamentally misunderstands both the history and the purpose of these programs. DEI initiatives emerged as thoughtful, evidence-based responses to documented inequities suffered by rural communities, minorities, women, the poor, and the disabled. These programs represent America at its best, acknowledging our nation's shortcomings and working tirelessly to overcome them. The ratification of the 14th Amendment in 1868 codified equal protection as a constitutional principle. Yet Americans soon discovered that simply declaring equal protection didn't automatically create it. The real challenge was in translating these legal guarantees into everyday justice through their implementations. When the landmark Supreme Court decisions in 2023 and 2024 further restricted race-conscious university admissions and workplace policies, they accelerated a retreat from this understanding. The history of DEI efforts in America is not some partisan agenda. It is part of our nation's ongoing work to ensure that America's promise extends to every American. And in 2025, as we face renewed attacks on these principles, we must renew our commitment to this work. Let me be clear. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are not about guaranteeing preferences. They're about removing barriers. They're not about lowering standards. They're about ensuring that the standards we apply don't inadvertently favor some groups while disadvantaging others who are equally qualified. When our military, for example, embraced diversity and inclusion, it didn't become weaker. It became the most formidable fighting force in human history. When our businesses embraced diverse talents and perspectives, they didn't become less competitive. They gained access to broader markets and built the strongest economy in the world. When our universities created more inclusive learning environments, they didn't sacrifice excellence. Instead, they became global leaders in research and education. The world is always watching us to see what we will accomplish. But now more than ever before, they are watching us to see who we will become. I still believe in an America where a child's potential isn't limited to his zip code, the color of his skin, their gender, or other factors beyond their control. I believe in an America where we can acknowledge our imperfect past while working together towards a more perfect future. Most of all, I believe in the fundamental goodness and fairness of the American people. When we move beyond slogans, when we truly see each other as fellow citizens on one shared journey, we find that what unites us is far greater than what divides us. While the temptation is great, we cannot let this moment divide us. We were never meant to be the divided states. We were created as and have thrived for over 250 years as the United States. Mr. Speaker, at this time, I'd like to yield as much time as he so consumed. The gentleman from Illinois, who is the chairman of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Mr. Jackson.
Thank you so much. I thank the Honorable Congressman Cleo Fields from the 6th District of the great state of Louisiana. I would like to read for you, Mr. Speaker, a speech that the Honorable Mr. George W. Bush gave at the inauguration of the African American History Museum. I was proud to be in attendance there, and I must say I was not a big fan of the presidency of Mr. George Bush, but looking back over the times now from which we have entered, I have to give him credit where credit is due. He gave a speech that day that I wish my Republican colleagues would take the time to listen to, and I will summarize it. He simply says, this museum, which he was the person that granted the land rights to on behalf of African Americans, he says, this museum is an important addition in our country for many reasons, and here are three. First, it shows our commitment to truth. A great nation does not hide its history, he said. It faces its flaws and corrects them. This museum tells the truth that a country founded on the promise of liberty held millions in chains, that the price of our union was America's original sin. From the beginning, some spoke to truth. John Adams called slavery an evil of colossal magnitude. Their voices were not heeded and often not heard, but they were always known to be a power greater than anything on earth. One who loves his children, he said, means for them to be free. Second, he says, this museum shows America's capacity to change. For centuries, slavery and segregation seemed permanent parts of our national life, but not to that of Nat Turner or Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, Rosa Parks, or Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. All answered cruelty with courage and hope. In a society governed by the people, no wrong lasts forever. After struggle and sacrifice, the American people, acting through the most democratic of means, amended our Constitution that originally treated slaves, Americans that had been enslaved, as 3/5 of human beings. To guarantee equal protection of the laws, after decades of struggle, Civil Rights Acts, Voting Rights Acts were finally enacted. Even today, the journey towards justice is still not complete. But this museum will inspire us to go further and get there faster. These are the words of George W. Bush. And finally, the museum showcases the talent of some of our finest Americans. The gallery celebrates not only African Americans' equality, but African Americans' greatness. He says, I cannot help but note that a huge influence of my teenage years is honored here. The great Chuck Berry, or my baseball idol growing up in West Texas, the great Willie Mays. And of course, something I had never really mastered, the ability to have a good speech, that of Thurgood Marshall. He concludes by saying, our country is better and more vibrant because their contributions and the contributions of millions of African Americans. No telling of American history is neither complete nor accurate without acknowledging them. The lesson of this museum is all, and that all Americans share a past and a future by staying true to our principles, righting injustices, and encouraging the empowerment of all. We will all even have a greater nation for generations to come. I congratulate those who played a role in creating this wonderful museum. These are the words of George W. Bush. I thank Mr. Bush for having helped erect that magnificent museum now that the current administration is trying to take the materials out. Earlier today, I wish Mr. Hegseth, our Secretary of Defense, could have shown the honor and the decency to come into the Capitol Visitor Center to acknowledge the women of 6888. Their Speaker Johnson was present, the leader of the Senate, Mr. Thune, but notably absent was that of our Secretary of Defense. And someone made the remarks, Mr. Speaker, today, that people were hidden. There were hidden figures in American history. I know the message that they're sending, referring to the movie of Hidden Figures, the African-American women that did the math to put man on the moon, but somehow was unceremoniously removed from all the accolades and all of the parades. These women that were called human calculators. And it came to my mind that they're really not hidden. Hidden is to be made inconvenient to the dominant narrative, shuffled to the footnotes or left in the cutting room floor of America's memory. It's dishonest, yes, but it leaves room for some discovery. Erasure is more sinister. Erasure says that we were never here. Erasure digs into the archives with red ink and crosses out our lives, achievements, and sufferings. The women in 6888 had suffered erasure. It removes their names from the rolls and gravestones from the earth. It doesn't just forget, it forbids remembering. After 80 years, these 885 women that put together 17 million pieces of mail that kept the morale of our troops high were given no recognition until today. So I thank Speaker Johnson, I thank Leader Thooms for their contribution. When we talk about erasure, ask the descendants of Tulsa's Greenwood District, who for decades lived with silence where there should have been national mourning. Ask the generations denied their roots by a system that said their past wasn't worth recording. We see it now in the battles over school curricula, in sanitized histories where the enslaved become mere workers and civil rights are a footnote to a fabled colorblind dream. We are allowed erasure to masquerade. When we allow erasure to masquerade as reform, we not only insult those who live the truth, we endanger the consciousness of a nation already prone to moral amnesia. To hide history is cowardice, I would say. To erase it is cruelty. America must choose neither, because when we forget what we were, we forfeit the right to know who we are. Mr. Speaker, we are addressing the issue today of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'd like to speak on this matter because it's an urgent matter, one that touches the very soul of our nation's promise and its founding ideals: equality, justice, and the pursuit of liberty. We're at a crossroads, a critical juncture, where the direction we choose will define the future of this nation. I speak today about the persistent and harmful attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion. These policies and how these attacks, particularly under the leadership of the President of the United States, are undermining the values upon which this nation was built. More profoundly, these attacks are not merely political, but they represent a direct assault on civil rights. Specifically, they started by targeting African Americans, and they threaten to undo the hard-fought progress that has been made over generations. DEI, at its core, is not just a set of policies, but an embodiment of American values. Values that ensure every citizen, regardless of race, gender, or background, has the opportunity to thrive. It reflects the notion that our strength as a nation lies in our diversity, that our success is drawn from the breadth of our collective experiences, and that our unity can be found not in the erasure of differences, but in the celebration of them. But today, this fundamental belief is under siege. When President Trump and his allies launched their attacks on DEI, they were not merely engaging in political rhetoric, they were dismantling policies designed to correct historical inequities and promote a more just and inclusive society. These efforts, cloaked in the language of merit and individual responsibility, are in fact a thinly veiled attempt to perpetuate a system that continues to privilege a select few while marginalizing the very communities that have fought the hardest for their rightful place in the American story. The deep scars of racism and inequality are not erased by wishful thinking or by policies that deny their existence. The attack on DEI is an attack on civil rights, the idea of an egalitarian democracy, and the constitutional ideals that undergird the very idea of America. This rhetoric is dangerous because it fundamentally misrepresents the mission of DEI, and in doing so, misrepresents the broader civil rights movement that has shaped this nation. It was, after all, the civil rights movement that won the battles to dismantle segregation, that fought for voting rights, that created the foundation of a more inclusive society. The very principle of DEI stems from these victories. When we attack diversity, equity, and inclusion, we erode the gains made through the blood, sweat, and tears from the marches from Selma to the legislative victories in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and beyond. To push to eliminate DEI policies is a dangerous step backwards in this ongoing fight for justice and equality. It is no accident that this movement to undermine DEI coincides with the resurgence of racism and hatred, and this rhetoric and these policies are un-American. These policies also coincide with the banning of books. When has the society moved forward banning books, I would ask you? When we talk about restraining freedoms on women's bodies, when has that ever been good for a society? When we talk about xenophobia, when most people in this country have come from other lands, the society has never moved forward. It is not a coincidence when I tell you, under the guise of fairness and colorblindness, these policies have disproportionately harmed the African American and the marginalized communities, all while maintaining a status quo that favors the privileged few. And while it is true that the Black community created the pathway that led to the greater diversity in America, the reality is Black people are not the only community that benefits from it. Women are a part of DEI. Veterans are a part of DEI. People with different abilities are a part of DEI. American workers are a part of DEI. And even women and families that need IVF, the in vitro fertilization, to build strong American families are all communities that benefit from DEI initiative. Here's a news flash. Diversity does not mean Black. Diversity can mean making sure people who use wheelchairs are not discriminated against and get equal consideration for housing and employment opportunities. It can mean making sure that senior citizens have the same protection as young people. To say nothing of the fact that ensuring the right of young people to be in leadership is what diversity and inclusion is all about. The move to get rid of these policies are not theoretical. They are real. They are felt, and they have consequences. Take, for example, the recent span of book bans across the nation, particularly those targeting African American authors, targeting our history, and targeting our lived experiences. Books like The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas, Beloved by Toni Morrison, Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates, have been removed from classrooms and libraries, not because of their literary merit, but because of the discomfort they cause of those who wish to ignore the brutal realities of race in America. These bans are not merely only an affront to academic freedom, they are an assault on Black identity and an attempt to stifle the critical conversations necessary for a truly inclusive society. Moreover, the policies that aim to ban discussions of race and racism in the classroom directly undermine the very spirit of education. It is no secret, especially those attending public schools in underserved communities are already facing systemic barriers to educational opportunities. When DEI programs are eliminated, when history is whitewashed, and when Black experiences are rendered invisible, the message sent to our children is clear. Your history, your experience, and your potential does not matter. These policies contribute to a culture of exclusion, a culture that denies the very existence of our humanity as a people, by extension, the humanity of all people. Mr. Speaker, at this time, I would like to yield to my colleague, the Honorable Cleo Fields from the great state of Louisiana.
Well, the gentleman entered into a colloquy because one of the problems I think that many people have with DEI programs, which is one of the same problems they had with affirmative action, if you recall, because they viewed it as two parallel lines where you took a person who was less qualified and you elevated them to the level of somebody who was more qualified. That is not DEI. That was not affirmative action. Instead, people should look at it, did you know, as a circle, and every single person within the circle are all qualified to do the job. But there's just one single problem. There are folk in the circle, although they are qualified, they never get chosen. You know, there are women in the circle who never get chosen simply because they are females. You know, Hispanics, blacks in the circle don't get chosen simply because of the color of their skin. And people need to view it that this circle, everybody in the circle is qualified, but DEI comes in and grabs people who are only not chosen, did you know, because of the color of their skin, because of their sex.
Congressman Fields, I find it interesting when we started this conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I've invited some of my other colleagues in to participate. And one person asked me, is it legal for you to discuss DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, as co-equal branches of government? We do not work for the Dodge, we do not work for the presidency. We fundamentally disagree with which way the nation is going under the presidency. And Mr. Pete Hegseth, our Secretary of Defense, needs to understand, if he would take the time to read it, that diversity is legal according to the United States Supreme Court in the Students for Fair Admissions. Here's what, Mr. Fields, I'd like to enter into the record. The generals that had written the amicus brief that they entered into their article said, growing and maintaining a highly qualified, diverse officer corps remains a U.S. national security imperative. We had discussed this at one point. Further on, they go on to say the U.S.'s military commitment to diverse and inclusive leadership derives from decades of experience. This is exponential. The U.S. military's international presence and engagements abroad with foreign military and civilians requires diversity in its officers' corps. In Part C, they say U.S. military diversity initiatives have led to significant progress in growing a highly diversified and qualified racially group of officer corps, that this work must continue. Invalidating universities' most recent race-conscious admissions policies would seriously impair the military's efforts to maintain cohesion and effectiveness. Mr. Fields, when they say they are anti-DEI, and then they take down the statues and remove the gravestones of Jackie Robinson, that does not help with military cohesion. And if there's one of our colleagues that's watching us in the chamber, we would invite you down so we can have a debate, a discussion on DEI, and stop the polarization and racializing this. They find it okay, and Mr. Pete Hegseth, to resurrect the name of Ku Klux Klansman Fort Bragg, General Bragg, but yet you take down the name of Jackie Robinson, and you're not dealing with improper ideology? Then you resurrect the names of so many other. There are 6 military bases that have some of these Confederate generals on there. But then you take down the name of Medgar Evers and Harriet Tubman. That is shameful and hypocritical. Diversity makes the nation stronger. Being committed to truth and justice about our past only serves as a benefit. It doesn't take anything away. And so the false narrative that people are unqualified simply is not true. We know from these halls of Congress right here, people whose parents have been here before can teach their children how to run for office, how to raise the funds. And you'll see children of those that have been in power following in that tradition. We're talking about creating an on-ramp for greater inclusiveness, for greater cohesion amongst the troop. And lastly, if it's good enough for the war room, isn't it good enough for the boardroom and classroom?
Well, I thank the gentleman, but you know, what's interesting is when the president signed that executive order to do away with three words, diversity, equity, and inclusion, it sent universities in a tailspin. They didn't know what to do. You know, in fact, the president himself ended a program, and I'm glad, the gentleman from Illinois, I'm glad you serve on agriculture, I'm glad that you and others wrote letters and he restored it, a program that gave young scholars scholarships to go to college, you know, 1890 universities. And he said that was a DEI program. And then later he reversed it because it was a program that really, these kids had to score, you know, high scores on the ACT in order to qualify. They had to have high GPAs. And then business, not to mention the impact it has had on businesses. There are businesses that have ended their DEI programs simply because of that executive order.
Mr. Fields, if I could jump in on that just for one moment. These are voluntary programs. These are aspirational programs, as you have shared with me. There's no DEI law. No DEI law has been passed by the Congress. How can you outlaw something that never was a law? When we go into the Senate, just at the other end of this chamber, Mr. Fields, you'll see E pluribus unum over the speaker. Out of many, we are one. That's the call for diversity. When we talk about equality in the 14th Amendment, equal protection under the law, we only had that once the nation could confront its history and tell the truth. We wouldn't have had to have the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery and the 14th Amendment that was meant for equal protection for those Americans that had been enslaved after 246 years from 1619 to 1865. And it was 346 years from 1619 to 1965 before the Voting Rights Act was even passed. And then the 15th Amendment came around to make sure that everyone had equal access to the ballot. And it wasn't fully enacted until 1965. So yes, this has been a long journey, and we cannot be cowards and not confront the history and the truth of our past.
Mr. Speaker, may I inquire as to how much time I have remaining?
Gentleman has 2 minutes remaining.
Okay.
25 hours remaining?
Two. I would like to yield a balance of my time to the gentleman from Illinois.
Congressman Fields, I'd like to thank you for this privilege of standing here beside you. Thank you for your commitment to justice. Thank you for your commitment to the American way. Thank you for making America better. Mr. Fields, your case right now before the United States Supreme Court, Louisiana versus Collis, is taking into account once again the maximum of equal protection under the law. We want to make sure that America stays strong and America gets better. And I would tell those that say, make America great again, I would tell them this is the greatest America has ever been. This body now has more female senators, has more people of ethnicities, more diversity, and I am proud of the culture that this great country has. I hope other people would step forward to find the courage to come and join us on this floor so we can have a conversation. Do not live in fear of the president primarying you. Do not live in fear of the president taking words out of your mouth. You can be a major law firm. Don't lose the ink in your pen because you have fear. You can be a major university. Don't give up your academic freedom because of fear. You have a major corporation. You have the right to align yourself with the interest of your shareholders and the interest of your future marketplace. Hold on to the DEI. Members of this body, as co-equal branches of government in the United States, fundamentally disagree with President Donald J. Trump. And Mr. Pete Hegseth, diversity is legal in the United States military. Colin Powell was an affirmative action general. We should tell the truth about it. He came through under the Carter administration. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank you for the time and your graciousness. Thank you, Congressman Fields. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.